Let's hop back into another CNN panel where the Republican members continue to make fools of themselves, something that is pretty much guaranteed nowadays and having to be a Trump supporter. So we'll be back after with the context that we can add.
They're not whiteboarding this. The NIH funds have been massively abused. Up to 50% go to overhead and administrative costs to these universities. That should be, they're saying we're going to cap that at 15%, like most other government contracts.
Well, I guess what I'm asking is, I mean, and I suspect that some of your the people in the state of New Hampshire would be affected by things like this. But
yeah, a bunch of overpaid
reduction,
academics that have been abusing the system.
Oh, wait, hold on just a second. What I'm talking about is medical research, which is what these things fund. And I think Katie Britt is talking about this too. There's a concern that just broadly cutting is going to basically stop the creation of medical research
is worried
all
about
across the country.
A bunch of professors getting fired. What this is saying is for the $1 million we're going to give you, $850,000 actually has to be spent on that medical research,
so
the product, not 50% of it on salaries.
You're not concerned that this is going to have an impact on cancer research, on medical trials?
No, theoretically, more dollars go to cancer research and less to go to the professors.
And this is the most obvious thing ever. To run these clinical trials with, again, we're talking about massive equipment that have massive electricity draws, massive other things, these massive kinds of tests, there obviously is going to be massive overhead costs. Not just salary, as he is alluding to, which I mean is still important, but electricity, utilities, whatever is needed to keep the facility open. These are called F&A costs, essentially, and these can be tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars. With most research, you're also operating at a loss, especially in fields like cancer research, where limiting these funds will make some universities unable to foot these costs, thus have to just either cut out critical research or just shut down. Either way, research is going to be hindered as a whole. The data community and sharing these things is going to be hindered as a whole. Even if you're just doing massive layoffs, that alone is going to still hinder critical research, as essentially all of these universities aren't going to be receiving the funding they need to stopgap their losses. Smaller universities, those without as many endowments, those with even really expensive labs are going to have to downsize, cut, or shut down. It's going to stop this kind of critical research, this kind of things that could prevent like the bird flu that we're talking about, all these other things that are happening. But instead, we're going to have to stop listening to these people, stop getting this kind of really good high-tech data and studies done in clinical trials, but instead let's just listen to the quack conspiracy theories from the party of people who think COVID was made in a lab to be a bioengineered weapon, because that's believable, guys. It's totally believable.
But on prices, people are wondering, when are the groceries going to go down? When are the housing costs going to go down? When are the inputs into their lives going to go down?
Effectively, they're not, though, right? That would be deflation. When we say price is going to, it means they finally stabilize at about a 1% inflation. If you had everything go down 10%, that might sound great, but that means we have a massive economic crisis in the country, right?
Exactly.
So when we talk about price stabilization, we want it to get back to about 1%, which is kind of where you want things to be.
No, well, yes and no, I guess. He's definitely overstating the fact that only an economic crisis can bring down prices. Also, is he admitting that Trump lied on the campaign trail to those he promised that he would not stabilize prices, but that he would massively bring prices down and that he would do it on day one? Was Trump promising an economic crisis then? Or was he lying? Which one is it, MAGA? CNN never asked the good follow-up questions. I mean, to be MAGA, you can't be very smart. So like, it would be really easy to just put them in a logic corner. I do it with the MAGA in my comments and all the time, like literally every one of them. So I would love if CNN could have someone who could just do that in real time to show the masses. But no, price gouging has led to large price increases. It's not just inflation. Pass-through costs in general is what leads to price increases, which is just costs that businesses pass on to their consumers. They almost never line up one-to-one to what their actual cost increase. With the price increases from COVID, for example, we saw corporations pass as much as 25% additional costs onto consumers as to what they saw their costs increase themselves. But Trump won't go after corporations. He's not going to go after these kinds of people because he's in the pocket of corporations and he doesn't care about the workers or the middle class. This would actually lower prices. He's just going to ignore it and would do so without an economic crisis. But Republicans would rather pretend that's not real than go after their main donor base. So instead, they're just saying, well, we can stabilize, but we can't take them down without an economic crisis, which is just a lie.
The other issue is people don't realize the amount of inflation that is regulatory driven, which Trump is really driving on. So you're going to see tariffs come in hard and fast. They're painful a little bit. That's why he's doing them quick and early to hopefully get through it. Negotiate some better long-term deals overseas, and then he can pull back on them. At the same time, get rid of all this regulation and bureaucracy and red tape, specifically on energy, right? An elderly family or a low-income family has to turn on that light switch and pay these massive energy subsidies because of regulation as much as anybody else. That's where we can see some I would say, deflation on the energy side.
Let's talk about these tariffs real quick, and then let's also talk about inflation. You can see that we get most of our steel from Mexico and Canada, most of our aluminum from Canada, UAE, and Mexico. If we tariff Canada and Mexico, this affects almost all manufacturing industries as they rely on steel imports for parts. We don't have the infrastructure to produce it ourselves. This is why, again, last time under Trump, we hit a manufacturing recession when he signed these exact same kinds of tariffs, why we lost hundreds of thousands of jobs specifically because, or tens of thousands of jobs specifically because of this. And now he's doing it again. It's if you massively tariff these things, people get laid off, prices go up, we hit another manufacturing recession. It's almost like he didn't learn last time, right? That's almost as concerning as him just doing it the first time and not listening to economists. Second, these people use inflation as such a boogeyman, and they don't even know what it is or what causes it, what drives it, anything like that. And they're just hoping that you don't either and that you just think inflation bad, right? It's all supply versus demand. And like most things, inflation isn't just inherently bad. Inflation in layman's terms, like in the most basic terms, is just growth of prices essentially, or of the economy, economically, if we're talking on a macro level. Demand drives prices. When you have really high demand that causes the supply to go low because everyone's going and buying things, prices are then going to shoot up. It's scarcity that drives that, right? However, even if there is insane demand, if the supply can keep up with the demand, it's not going to create this scarcity, thus the prices won't be affected. And then deflation is just the opposite of that. If supply goes through the roof, but there is no demand, then obviously prices are going to go down. On a macroeconomic level, it just means that people in the economy are buying things that the economy is producing. You can use this to dictate economic policy on a macro level. If inflation is high, it means that people are spending massively, but your economy isn't producing at levels to match. Maybe you need more imports, maybe you need more manufacturing infrastructure, etc., whatever it might be. On the other end, if you're having deflation, your economy is producing, but nobody is spending. Maybe you need a massive tax break to put more money in people's hands, or a wage spike, or a stimulus check like we saw during COVID. So when these people say regulation is driving inflation, it's just buzzwords. It doesn't mean anything when we're producing more oil than we ever have before, when we're more energy independent than we ever have before. Also, our energy inflation is like 2%, which is the target range for growth. The question now becomes, at which point do we force this into deflation as we switch to renewable energy and other methods? And these kind of energy methods become not really what as a society we're seeking out anymore. This Republican, however, seems to be suggesting instead of doing that and continuing the growth that we've been working on, we should force a spike in inflation somehow, pushing for more demand, which he's trying to insinuate we could do by cutting regulations of people turning on their light, which don't exist. These things are also fake, but we don't have to get into that. This would only drive up energy prices, though. As I just laid out to you, even if supply is up here, demand being down here keeps the prices low because supply greatly outweighs demand. As demand comes up to meet supply, prices are going to go up. And if we're more energy independent now than we've ever been, the question is, how much higher can we even get the supply? Probably not much. So then why would we increase the demand for it, which could lead to massive inflation spikes down the line if demand then goes past supply and we can't get more supply because we're already more energy independent than we've ever been. Joe Biden already approved massive amounts of oil permits and such. So none of this makes any sense. I'm sorry for the economics lesson, but just knowing the bare minimum really exposes how MAGA just says things, doesn't understand them. But these buzzwords just create such like a motivating factor among their base where they hear like regulation and they hate it, even though they probably couldn't understand like what regulation drives. They couldn't tell you like the normal effects. These people don't know economics 101. Just go to college, take economics 101. Please stop speaking about things off vibes. That is like my biggest pet peeve with politics, is just stop talking about things off vibes because you don't know what you're talking about. Just learn the bare minimum and then come back and have an opinion. It's that simple.